Wait a minute. Hang on a minute. It's happening. It's finally happening. He's doing it. He's talking about the Good Dinosaur. He's finally doing it. Yeah, motherfucker, number 5. Alright, you cluckers. Let's fucking go! It's a Good Dinosaur time! Boy gets lost and needs to get home! Nothing more metal than the power of friendship! I'm so excited to talk about this movie finally! Yes! Good Dinosaur takes place on a version of Earth. The Good Dinosaur takes place on a version of Earth where the meteor, which meant the end of the dinosaurs, never hit, and so they lived on and started to get smarter. It's a simple setup to tell a small-scale story about Arlo, the runt of a litter of family of Apatosauruses, of dinosaur farmers basically. Born small and cowardly, he tries to measure up to the example set by his father Henry, but finds it very difficult to get a hold of his fear. He's born scared of everything. His father Henry builds a silo to hold their corn crops and keep them safe from critters, and on it there's a little spot for each of the kids to leave their footprint once they make their mark, which they'll earn once they do something bigger than themselves. Both of Arlo's siblings, Buck and Libby, get it done, but Arlo keeps failing. When critters get into the crops, Arlo's dad gives him a job to take care of them, but when one shows up, it's just a little dude, and Arlo takes pity and lets him go. Furious that Arlo has let the fear get the better of him again, and instead of his usual gentle hand, Henry loses his temper and runs after the critter with Arlo. Too late realizing that he's made a mistake, a storm has begun and they need to get back home, Henry pushes Arlo to safety but is lost to the storm. Without Henry on the farm, things are even more difficult now, and Arlo feels even more pressure to help and step up with his family. One day he finds the critter again, and seeking to right his wrong, he chases after it, being caught up in the river and washed well downstream. Now his only mission is to get home, and with the help of the critter, who becomes a friend that he named Spot, they both confront the danger presented by the wild and enjoy the beauty you can find within it. Whether it's foraging for food, encountering other creatures, both dangerous and friendly, Arlo learns to dig deep to find his way home against all odds, but also to grieve for the father he's lost, finally get through his fear, and do something bigger than himself. Now, I've been doing unpopular opinions about Pixar this whole time. Anything I said about WALL-E, Monsters Inc., or Soul, I kinda knew wasn't gonna go down the best, but even criticizing good movies probably isn't as strange as putting The Good Dinosaur in my top 5, right? As far as I can tell, this is one of the least popular Pixar entries. It usually ranks very low on people's lists, if not at the very bottom entirely, if they remember it at all. I've had to tell too many people that yes, it is Pixar, and no, Planes isn't. I care about this a lot more than normal people. I get that it's confusing when they haven't marketed the film well at all. It's totally fine. And yes, I did think very, very hard about where to place this. You'd think, given how often my videos present opinions that are not all that popular, that I'd be used to sitting in this feeling of contrarianness by now. And yeah, I'm kind of getting there. I'm kind of finally getting used to it. But I really did try to think of genuine reasons why I'd put this in other places on my ranking, even just to spare myself the hassle of having to stand behind yet another unpopular take. I have complaints and some gripes with every Pixar movie, none are invulnerable, but man, I can't lie, The Good Dinosaur is just one of my absolute favorites from them, and I really don't want to downplay that. From a studio with coming up on 30 films now, of course all of them are special in their own way, but I really do find the remaining films I'm yet to talk about have something unique about them that sets them apart from everything else the studio has produced. It might be something as simple as the film which straddles the most genres like The Incredibles, is the most suspenseful and tense like Toy Story 3, or in the case of The Good Dinosaur, is probably just their most down-to-earth and organic story. It's often called boring, but if it helps, I do believe The Good Dinosaur is a spiritual successor to the non-dialogue, animation performance first stylings of WALL-E. Even if both are very expressive on sound design fronts too, Dinosaur carries on that mantle in a barren world feeling, following a single protagonist, and tells as much of its story through body language as through dialogue. In several ways, I think it's a marked improvement on this front, mostly because it's just far more committed to its initial setup and is perfectly comfortable with the sphere that it's operating within. I've said before that Pixar's ability to welcome you into a larger story than it at first appears to be is really what sets their movies apart. I think with The Good Dinosaur, actually, it's a bit more subtle than you'd think by doing it right
right away. The setup is that dinosaurs are still here, the meteor missed, and then lightly subverting the established and usual storytelling surrounding dinosaurs in media as aggressive, scary creatures by telling a very human story with one of them going on a countryside journey. That threshold that they cross within a minute and a half. Is genre homage to Americana and Western filmic styles to see that through is honest and feels very followed through with. There is no twist coming, there is no second act change around where the movie is suddenly a different movie, and while it might be a surprise that there's not more to it, I never feel a Pixar film that's this comfortable just being what it is. Their films are not usually in possession of the quality of humility in the way this one is. Dinosaur's commitment from start to end to its time, its place, its style in the face of media, which even at the time that's supposed to be continually stimulating, is something I deeply appreciate, even more now, and I'm sure you can understand why. An American animated family film which demands my attention span and patience is a beautiful change of pace. When watching the films in a batch, it feels really different for Pixar to throw out the bag of tricks like that and just tell a story. To me, a guy who was watching these films back to back, often to write about them, it stood out more and more strongly because of that restraint and commitment each time. It gives it a character that just doesn't feel like a movie made by them, and that makes it very valuable. And it shows to me that even if you strip away their fanciness, all the habits, all the established storytelling avenues, dialogue as like a scaffolding to build everything on top of, Pixar can just tell a good story in a compelling way. Dinosaur presents a tooth and nail commitment to a particularly slow, deliberate, lumbering voice that deeply resonates with me. The space it takes and the faith it puts in simplicity make it a film which risks more by doing less. It was the studio's first box office failure, meaning it's unlikely we'll ever see a film quite like this again from them, and that's another reason it's worth valuing. They'd never done this before, and they will never venture into this style again. I can guarantee you that. You sometimes do need to be in the right mood for a certain film though, in the right environment, maybe in the right frame of mind or part of your life with the right people or lack thereof to enjoy an experience like this to its fullest extent. You got to be paying attention to the right things, receptive to the rest, and open to the kind of experience that a film is offering to get it, as it were. This is the same for any genre. Often I gauge what mood I'm in before I choose a film to watch. Do I feel up to something heavy that day? Do I want something familiar or easy? A bit new but not too much? Better knowledge of myself can clue me into what kinds of experiences I'm actually searching for and challenging myself when I know that I could probably take it. I don't turn on a Scorsese film unless I'm in a film education mood, and I don't watch Marvel unless I want to make a choice to kind of just waste some time. Now, when it comes to these Pixar films and my writing about them, as I've said before, I'm an adult who has watched them very intentionally and by myself. That's my environment. I'm not saying throw a dinosaur on at a kid's party to give them something to look at. I'm not sure it's best there. It doesn't ask you to be receptive to the same kind of experience as many other Pixar films. It's not a comedy. It's not even really a family film. I think of it as a Pixar film for adults in their room alone. I think it's for me. Unlike so many of their films, I think the way that I watched it, with the lights off in the evening when I'm ready to pay attention, is exactly the kind of environment in which it thrives. I'm already predisposed to the kind of genre that it's within. Drama is my favorite thing, but this storytelling voice of being very slow and deliberate is also something I just have an affinity for. The screenplay for my favorite movie literally begins with the script note, "This is not going to be a reasonable film," because I am enraptured by the most banal shit on earth. So you may very well find this movie boring or not providing what you're looking for, which is okay, but that isn't the same thing as a bad film which isn't hitting the brief. I know people who get those two intermingled with each other all the time for Pixar. We can't help it. We like the Pixar movies we see ourselves in the most, and maybe you don't see yourself in Dinosaur the way I do. But if you're after my take on boring movies, look at the lengths of videos in my catalog on this channel that I've spent years building, and you might quickly figure out that you and I could possibly have a different understanding of what boring actually means. What I don't find boring is command of atmosphere, is something that involves a lot of space. What I find riveting is tension. What I find involving is character growth. What I find engaging is sound, time, emotion, being allowed windows into a state of mind which exists like a planetarium that I can look up into, like a beautiful ceiling, no matter how fast it's moving, and take time to feel it, to live in that world. I enjoy a film that's committed to an angle like that, and The Good Dinosaur simply has all of those things. That's why I like it. I don't really mind it being less stimulating. I love it being more committed. I don't mind taking a few steps over toward it because I'm in the business of asking people to step over to me and enjoy what I'm making as well. well. I make concept albums, I make 3-hour videos. Like, this is not, like, I'm speaking a similar language to this movie, so that's where I'm coming from. The Good Dinosaur, therefore, I think is absolutely one of the finest and most ambitious works Pixar have yet produced. It does a marvelous job at building a story about grief that feels honest and new. It's a focused, human, and to me, very necessary film, which has not only deepened my understanding of what loss and growth is and can really be, it's a rumination on the nature of courage in the face of it in a way I find very commendable. I always thought this was a good movie since I saw it in the cinemas, but that's not just it. It's actively helped me in my life on multiple occasions in ways I have found so crucial. A big part of that is, while the film does start on the note of families like a lot of their work, it's doubtlessly a movie which is more concerned with a sense of the individual than usual for them, of personal growth rather than interpersonal understanding. Exceptionally few of their movies deal this strongly with a character just getting in better touch with themselves. Yes, Spot and Arlo do grow closer, but the film very much positions Arlo as the character who's doing the developing, and I find that focus very refreshing. It doesn't really get weighed down with the pitfalls of zero-sum family hurts or really caring all that much about external characters, because it's about the one person. The film opens up on a farm, showing you the process of living a quiet life, the hatching of eggs, the responsibilities each family member has, and a bit of each of their personalities. Jeffrey Wright plays Henry with a seasoned, gentle gravel that gives the character a sense of power. And as a father with not a whole lot of time in the film, I find him a very convincingly and maturely written character because he is flawed. I enjoyed the simple homely devices on the farm, like leaving your mark and watering crops. It gives a huge sense of perspective to the danger presented in the film's second and third acts. Yes, things are tough on the farm and these things need to get done, so if Arlo is scared of feeding some birds in a pen, how the hell is he gonna survive out in the world when the menial tasks are made to look tiny by these deathly challenges around him? The farm's setup gives him something to look forward to strive for, like this is a place of safety, and it gives you the right amount of time to enjoy the family and that dynamic there too. With the father, Henry loves his kids, he loves his farm, but he also needs the farm to work. And while trying to gently guide Arlo for a time, I understand why he gets fed up with Arlo eventually, and also see his reaction for the emotional mistake that it is. He gets caught up in this moment, and it's a very believable kind of frustration for that character. He just doesn't get the time to make up for it. It hits this really nice spot of like, oh yeah, I understand how that's a mistake and not a great thing to do as a dad, but I get why he's feeling that way, and he's not like unforgivable for that. It's a kind of threading the needle there. Arlo, trying to find his way back home through this world around him later, is in possession of a sense of organic flow in the film structure that I feel basically nowhere else in the filmography of Pixar. I love this edit. It makes sense, given how focused the film is on nature, that it would attempt to feel this way, very fluid and soft. The film is almost entirely opposed to montage, especially after the opening. You sit with these characters in real moments and get a great sense of the time passing. It's got a very light touch, so each scene can make a big moment out of a small thing. Climbing up a wall, getting some berries, playing with gophers. I very rarely disengage with this type of thing because there's no sense of disinterest on the film's part in playing out its own world believably. If it had a montage of Arlo and Spot walking through various biomes to a commercial song and didn't feel interested in the journey part and only the little adventure things in the middle, that's a different story. Here, it plays out a lot smaller, less flashy moments. Building a shelter, Spot finding Arlo some food when he's been injured, naming Spot. It's focused on the unconventional, less exciting parts of the journey home, and that makes it feel more actual and less pretty. I don't want to play up the non-dialogue of this film too much. There is a fair bit of talking in the setup and a lot of expressive sound work, but there is a lot of just body language conversation going on here too. The scenes between Arlo and Spot rely a lot on their communication physically, and I feel more engaged in actually watching the film for its other components therefore. The switch from when they're at odds to when they start to work together, Arlo's like slight dependency on Spot for a little while until they actually start doing friend stuff, and they're like a union feels really soft and happening organically, shown in their behavior toward each other as much as Arlo's talking. Without much like actual dialogue to signpost these changes or make these super obvious, a lot relies on the visuals here. This happens before a reintroduction of the specter of Arlo's father by way of Arlo and Spot enjoying playing with the fireflies, so it's bringing that idea back at the right time once Spot and Arlo have like grown together. Again, that's a very light touch and very difficult thing to feel. To aid this, the music and score for this film feels extremely precise to this edit, like down to the second. There are short lifts of music that happen just to aid a small moment of tension before it glides into something else. An accompaniment will begin to inject just the right amount of mood for the exact moment before stepping back when the moment changes. It's hard to describe. It's something I really only noticed on my recent watches, but while there might be like more memorable themes or stings in other films, I rarely feel like the music in a Pixar film is this kind of essential. It relies on the score quite centrally to lift and pull and push without calling attention to itself or overplaying the scenes. And so we get a film which is, as far as Pixar goes for tone, editing, structure, and arc, remarkably fluid. Contributing to this is one of Pixar's most incidental feeling worlds. Geography in which the scenes take place feels incredibly real for them, and visually, it's a peculiar one for them in many ways. There's an ultra-real aspect to the background, as well as stylized characters who feel soft and cartoony. It took me a while to understand this choice here, but I now do believe The Good Dinosaur is visually my second favorite of their works, just behind Toy Story 4. I didn't gain a real true appreciation for how different the nature of Dinosaur feels, and how deeply that impacts the feeling of watching the film until I took the time to see it within the context of their larger filmography. In contrasting the majority of their worlds to this, which often feel very intentional, prim, purpose-built, with every detail in every room poured over, it feels like Dinosaur went kind of the other direction, with scenes often taking place in biomes that feel as expansive as they do inconsequential. It's like locations here have been scouted and not designed. There's one room in the whole movie, and we only go in there once. The rest is this sense of scale, backdrop, busyness, landscape, painting, vegetation stuff that is technologically daunting, but narratively it's crucial that it feels a certain way. The building of this environment relied a lot on a great deal of simulation and far less drawing than is typical for Pixar. Of course, there's a balance between like handcrafted landscapes and generated landscapes, but like they took reference from real topographical maps, satellite imagery, loading in photorealistic textures and setting parameters for like a geography generator. It's a coarse simplification of what's happened here, but there was an awful lot of math involved in building worlds which feel this real. Specifically, the area around like rendering detail and asset repetition is so important here behind the scenes, but is completely invisible on the screen. To keep an entire forest's worth of trees and leaves and grass and stuff in a computer's memory isn't practical, so a lot of the tech became about optimizing the assets that you have, reusing the same trees in totally invisible ways, making sure you're not rendering a river that's a mile away in the shot to the same level of quality as something an inch away from the lens, things like that. The river simulation, like the water in this film, is beautiful in a very different way from like the sea or like stuff in tanks, since like water has to react to a riverbed underneath the surface tension. Water simulation apparently is prohibitively expensive if you want to do it on this scale, so it's actually like they take like a part of the river and then repeat it, so it's reusing the same, like recycling the same kind of water simulation again and again in a completely invisible way. Like you don't notice that. It's so effective. If the computer generates like a clearing that has far too many rocks in it or something, you go through and you prune them out until you have a spot that suits that moment better. It feels natural. The Good Dinosaur also created clouds quite differently, making them in dynamic 3D volume instead of flat or matte paintings. This was important to help them feel more real and alive across the various weather states of the film, especially since Arlo and Spot at one point interact with clouds directly, and storms are used as a major motif for Arlo as well, like the Chekhov's gun of the story, so they needed to feel a certain way. This was achieved through consulting the satellite image databases from places like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's research and documentation to achieve photorealistic cloud simulations. Yes, researching a Pixar film taught me there's a government division called the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA. They tell you the weather, but they also help with the movie. This is also super significant for lighting, since volumetric clouds are going to affect light going through them in a natural way. The way the sun or moon peeks through them in different scenes is just as important to getting a real look and feel for any of the scenes here, like the stuff like dust or mist as well. The vegetation this all interacts with, since you're not just simulating grass in a field, it has to move and react to wind realistically depending on the scene. Moving a tree means the trunk moves and then the leaves move now because they're tied to the trunk, you know, it's like a hierarchy. It's so complex. It appears the time pressure and total team change on the film, like a couple of years out from its release, influenced quite a lot of the production here. So sometimes the simplest choices here become the most valuable. The upside down shark fins is such a clever and spooky twist on that trope that stays really effective and highlights the weather there, setting the tone for the upcoming scene very clearly. The residual snow on the mountains after the campfire storytelling scene was actually like a shader error, which was exploited to shortcut the need to redecorate the environment. During Arlo's concussion dream sequence where he sees his father and finds his strength to go help Spot, the rain changes partway through the scene. I love this. Partway through the scene to have this prismatic chromatic aberration effect, like a blue-green digital misalignment thing, which comes across as this rapidly moving, sparkly colored bokeh that just lifts that scene beautifully without you even noticing. It helps to give a small lift in color to that moment and makes the switch back to reality feel significant, but without entirely lifting the dream sequence away from the tension and urgency the film still needs to be maintaining at that point. And the effect is a film which challenges the established and since repeated feeling of Pixar worlds to a fundamental degree. The form here is totally different. It allows me to focus on the characters completely. Like, I might be nerding out on the tech specs and that's a lot of fun for me, but when I'm watching the movie, I'm not looking for Easter eggs, I'm feeling the story. I'm not noticing prismatic rain effects, I'm feeling the effect of them. There's a level of awkwardness to this world, to like a forest clearing that's very true, an organic chaos in an overturned tree stump that feels uncomfortable and undesigned. There's a feeling of the artist guiding the frame rather than dictating it, and this is so essential to the message and feeling of this film. Since the world is its own character, since that river is its own character, should it have felt too rigid or perfect or uncommitted to, the atmosphere of the film would completely change for every second that it's playing. Something the film conveys quite strongly, even while dinosaurs are intelligent and know how to farm, the world isn't civilized, and once you're off the farm, Arlo's father Henry saying sometimes you gotta get through the fear to see the beauty on the other side is echoed time and time again by the world itself. I feel that in action, the world is equal parts pretty and lovely, but also home to an uncaring cycle of life, weather, and population. It doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in pursuit of a really grim and hard to watch realistic kid versus the wild type story, but in the name of striking a natural balance between the dark and the light out here, especially at this time in their filmography, this still feels like Pixar's darkest story and atmosphere by a sight. Now, Toy Story 3 might be more frightening, The Incredibles might feel more adult thematically, but in terms of the events, imagery, and just the undercurrent of lethality, The Good Dinosaur presents as much of a return to some classic Disney spooky vibes as I think Pixar have ever provided. Bambi, for instance, is about as committed a depiction to the cycle of life out in the wild as we may ever see for an animated film, and it presents danger as a central element of that life. I think The Good Dinosaur is very much in line with that goal. In this movie, the kid watches his dad die, and the majority of the film is spent watching him afterward get into grim danger at nearly every turn and get hurt just as often. The sound design on every head injury this kid sustains makes me flinch every fucking time. Head trauma, bruises, this desperate moment where he's trapped under the rock. Did you ever expect someone to mention 127 hours while talking about Pixar? No, me neither, but here I am doing it. Twice.
So I chew the dang thing off!
Who does that?
Spot nearly strangling himself to death in a mad panic as Arlo decides whether or not to beat him until he stops moving. The climax is him saving Spot from being eaten alive. Spot then uses his teeth to tear the membrane out of a pterodactyl's wing before Arlo fucking sends him to drown with the rest of his buddies. It might not be the toughest punches you sustained if you grew up like me in a never-ending story world, but in a modern context, this is not normal. I've spoken a lot about how Pixar's relationship with danger in their films feels like it's changed. Sometimes things are too nice to sand it off, the edges are too round, from the art styles to their messaging. It's a core element of what has changed in the film industry as they've continued making movies, I think. Family films are generally more palatable than they ever used to be. That's not an altogether bad thing, but it does limit their genre flexibility, and I think it's been at least several years since a villain of theirs has really captured my attention. At times it can feel like they're pulling punches. I don't want a cruel movie, but as a kid, I enjoyed a sense of danger. They seem less interested in telling stories that place their protagonists in dangerous circumstances these days, but it can lead to their films feeling a little toothless if you notice how often it happens. Now, I've written about this a lot throughout this series, but I got a totally different look at the situation when I went with my sibling Ray, who I interviewed a few episodes ago, and my 4-year-old nephew to see the Paw Patrol Mighty movie a little while ago. And I'll tell you, it was a really fascinating watch seeing him and all the other kids getting scared at basically anything at all. You can't predict what gives them the shivers, and that's Paw Patrol. It really made me think kids being scared is never something I think filmmakers should avoid, because watching them react was like, oh, These kids are invested. They really want Sky to get help because she's in the snow while she's sneaking into the villain's lair. I cannot stress enough, but these moments didn't even cross the threshold of being moody, much less scary, but my nephew got stressed. It's just how the story went. And that's Paw Patrol. It's not seeking to be challenging to anybody, but a parent's ability to hang onto their wallet when the kid wants toys from the movie suddenly. I didn't know this until I saw it firsthand, but there is no balance a filmmaker can strike here. You cannot trim a film to be completely safe for a child to approach. You cannot avoid upsetting kids in your movies if you're trying to actually tell a story. Someone reacting emotionally to your work just means that it's effective. And if Doctor Who isn't freaking the hell out of kids, then it's not Doctor Who, is it? Unless you're trying to numb them into submission and not do anything with them emotionally, you need things like the natural mood changes that come with a family story. And they're going to do with this tonal information what they will. When it comes to animated films being more serious or more frightening, more upfront with what's scary like Good Dinosaur is, yes, it might upset a kid, and there's probably a line somewhere between this and Watership Down, but kids and audiences generally are gonna get upset by the film anyway if they care enough about the movie to pay attention to it. It's not a symptom of the film being scarring for young audiences, fuck however many parents are writing you angry letters. It's a symptom of a child being invested in the safety of the characters, which is kind of exactly what you're after, right? All to say, compared to a lot of other movies around this style and around this time, when it comes to that more grim tint, The Good Dinosaur really doesn't feel like it's trying to be soft-spoken. It is not really pulling its punches. Arlo watches his dad die, sees Spot rip the head off a bug, watches a fox get swallowed right in front of him by these intense, roided up pterodactyls who start hunting for his child human friend. It's not for the faint of heart as far as Pixar go, and has so much more in common with older Disney films like The Lion King or Bambi in this regard than something like Monsters U. The balance, I think, is perfect between scary moments like these physical fights and stampedes, along with galloping through thousands of birds happily, the rise and lift, the way Arlo gains and loses his courage within that push and pull. It's so beautifully refined. Accordingly, the style of the characters really pops on this world because of it. The cartoony touches somehow soften the visuals whilst hardening the core of the film. The danger subverts the paint job, but it makes it seem more menacing, you know? If you're the kind of person who would have preferred like Favreau's The Lion King to have more cartoonified lions than photoreal ones, I think this is the kind of visual you're talking about, right? That maintains a sense of reality without losing the animated expression. It's such a strange confluence of adorable and grim that helps both feel effective and gives the film a real sense of quiet confidence. To help bridge this gap between like cartoony characters and this ultra real world, it's important how clear it is when characters have physical interactions with stuff in their environment, something nearly every scene tries to hit on. Getting the feeling that these characters are part of this world is sold really well by the footfalls on rocks, trees and plants being pulled or snapped, creatures contacting each other. It's not even something I understood to be so crucial until it was pointed out in the film's commentary, like, oh, that's perfection. Now, somebody might need to buckle up for what I'm about to say, but I mean it very sincerely. Raymond Ochoa as Arlo in The Good Dinosaur is probably my favorite performance in a Pixar movie. The combination of his design with this voice, I think, is just sublime, and the performance itself is so raw and real. I don't know, one day I just woke up and I figured out that character voices in animation projects that are usually classified as annoying are always my favorite ones. I love Rugrats. Just that voice cast, especially the voice of Tommy Pickles. Oh, I just love it so. Vanellope von Schweetz. Just is something so charming about it, man. Those imperfections, those human cracks, and the unflattering yelps are so actual to me. It doesn't sound like acting. It sounds like you've met an actual person in the world with an imperfect voice that maybe isn't suited to listen to all day, which becomes the strongest part of it when trying to tell a story about flawed characters like this. It doesn't just highlight, but plays into the very things about vocal weakness with which the character of Arlo himself is struggling. Who better to cast than a performer whose voice is cracking and high-pitched for this character? There isn't one, and I think it's beautiful. Ochoa leans into that flawed, cracking side of his register with such abandon, giving a very believable style and unique level of performance. Arlo is run so ragged throughout the film, and you can really hear how worn through and desperate he gets at certain moments. As a character who's alone and the only one talking pretty often, for a kid, he had to display an extreme level of dynamic of mood, intensity, and emotion, and serve alongside such seasoned performers as Jeffrey Wright and Sam Sam Elliott and holds his own with this unique tone, and I think Ochoa more than serves the film, he absolutely elevates it. This character does a lot of screaming. Ochoa's range of various screams is harder to nail for a vocal performer than you might think. They're like yells informed by different emotions, like yells of fear, both sudden or worked up too, yells laced with anger, panic, desperation, conviction, courage. Kid wore himself out to perform a really full range as the character, and I've never once questioned the authenticity of the voice. Somehow he's got that tone of like a real kid that lacks that performative edge, but still serves the material beautifully as an actor. I think Ochoa has moved on from acting, but I've got no clue why, man. This kid gave such a nuanced, incredible performance. Arlo as that character presents the flaw there front and center. He's a kid, and he's not a wonder kid, he's a normal under average kid. He's scared, he doesn't always make good choices, he's weak, he's a little difficult to root for, he's got some growing to do, and he is in a circumstance where he is the only one who can pick himself up. He has these moments where the depth of his failure and distance from where he should be seems to register, and the weight of responsibility that he feels to get back to his family is really felt. He's not trying to survive to just be able to see another day. He's trying to conquer his fears to get home and make right the weight he feels he needs to carry, which he hasn't been able to do before. That's a good character, that's a great character, especially for Pixar at the time they made this film. You want to see the opposite of a Mary Sue? Here you go. A weak-ass kid with a good heart with very obvious limitations, and even when he wins, he doesn't do it gracefully. That slow struggle across the film of him learning to get a hold of his courage, matching with him learning to control and get in touch with his own body, is so good. He's awkward and gangly, like knocked knees, like really low to the ground initially. Like the word for his body is unfortunate. With these bulbous feet and long neck, he doesn't know his own dimensions and weight all that well. He carries himself a certain way, and it's such a strange thing to imagine animating, to feel such a sense of physical strangeness without it ever really being spoken about. How to, within control, convey a lack of control. How over time he starts learning his own weight, how to swim, how to run, becomes more coordinated, and you can see his courage grow by watching his own physicality at any moment in the story. It's the kind of thing the extra space and time gives the film the opportunity to explore and convey, and I love how even when the film ends, it's not as though he's just grown 16 feet and can suddenly do everything perfectly. He is simply walking a bit taller and is in more command of who he is. It is not a finished journey. He will continue to grow from here and is just on the right path. We know he's going to be okay. But perhaps a lot of the reason I find Ochoa's performance there so strong is because of the acting performances achieved by the animators, like with the body language here, is so fucking exceptional. There's absolutely nothing to hide behind here. So when these moments, particularly those without dialogue, such as the entirety of the film's climax, land and register so powerfully and emotionally without the scaffolding of dialogue to lean on, that's thanks entirely to the visual language giving so much of the story on its own. You can tell what Arlo is thinking, you can feel the emotion behind the animation, and it's so wonderfully done so persistently in each and every scene. Spot starting this as like a very purely animal, showing him very little human emotion, is shown through his body language and expression work, like he's following instincts, and he slowly begins getting more human and vulnerable as the movie goes. Like in the stick figure moment, he's the first to show that vulnerability. Arlo's time with the T-Rex Longhorn Shepherds is a great slice of reprieve from the length of time he's been by himself, a great change of pace, and a soft return to the early part of the film with the family. He's able to learn from more experienced dinos who are firmer with him, and he rises to that occasion with the right amount of courage and self-determination without being perfect at everything. The following scenes of reiterating that fear is not something one can evict entirely, it's knowledge to take into account and move forward with, I think land really, really well. Since fear as a concept is investigated from so many different angles here, like the antler creature who is also afraid of everything to the pterodactyls who are afraid of nothing, the way Dinosaur explains what courage is and how important it is in both death and life circumstances, but also in everyday moments, is something I just really believe in. I find the way the film explains how scary a lot of different things can be, and how courage can be a very tough, ongoing thing to grasp, and even how it's easier in some circumstances than others is measured and naturally conveyed. How your scars can eventually become stories. It's show not tell 101. The straight up storytelling is refreshing. There's nuance and elegance in the simplest of tools. It's a film where the experience and emotion that it brings up in each moment is a part of that story. Galloping galloping through the field of birds, throwing Spot up through the clouds. This euphoric release of pride and physical expression in having done something right is as much a part of the story as it is a beautiful moment of visual splendor. We are not moving through minutes to reach little moments here. It's every emotion all in a row. The final moments where Arlo saves Spot from the flood and the dinos trying to eat him is a thrilling, properly dangerous feeling scene of magnificent weight, which pulls together each lesson Arlo has learned into this moment of payoff that feels satisfying and earned. I think that's a bold aspect here. I think it's a risk to show what feels like a smaller single step in a life journey for this type of character without adding much of a larger narrative to continue with later. I think it showed a side of Pixar that said they didn't need to be frenetic and quick. They could be slow and deliberate and dangerous when they want. They could show hurt and harm in a way that doesn't feel nice. They could hurt their protagonists in real, meaningful ways, animate bruises and limping and grimaces, both physical and mental, and show extended sequences of genuine, real emotional pain and panic, which doesn't feel manicured or pretty. When I ask for Pixar movies to be darker, to be a little more grim, to treat their subject matter with sincerity, to do away with the too nice attitude and treat an audience with respect, like they know we can handle this, The Good Dinosaur is exactly what I mean. It's what I want. It's an example of a more modern Pixar film where they are still very much capable of producing that edge, and is one of the very few Pixar films where a character does die in the story too, especially if we discount villains. I also see a film which is aware and honest about grief's many facets, and the fact that it's far from a frictionless experience. Grief is not an entertaining thing, and it might be different for the studio for some reason, that it's a far more down-to-earth exploration of that than cuddling it up in a balloon house and talking dogs, but that makes it a wise, measured, and actually a little more helpful take, I think, as an alternative. I mean, this film is bold when there's a minutes-long sequence where Arlo shares with Spot about his life and loss, and then Spot shares his own, where the film is in absolutely no rush to downplay the significance of this to get to something more frantic, and is simply playing the moment fully and truthfully. I don't just find this kind of thing interesting for animated films or rare. Like, for them, I think it's rare in general to show your protagonist being vulnerable in this way, in a way which is not glamorous or quick or loud and highlights genuine weakness and shortcoming. For me, it harkens all the way back to some of the films I loved most as a kid, like the Raimi Spider-Mans, where in an action comic book film, there are these beautiful, quiet scenes of interpersonal loss that you don't get nearly as much in this space in movies anymore. I missed him a lot today is my favorite line in any of those movies. It's so vulnerable to show your hero in that kind of state, sitting alone, just sad. And this moment plays out so fully in that same vein with such care and feels like a deeply real thing. Arlo and Spot connect over their losses and their loneliness, and Spot gives to Arlo a custom of his own people with which they can cry out their pain to the stars, united in grief. I struggle to think of any other all-ages films that are this plain-faced about how much this kind of thing just sucks. It's got to thread that line, right? There are moments where there's like fun to be had, and there's others where it's pretty real about, hey, like losing a parent, finding yourself moving through stages of life, growing into a new person is not an easy thing to do. You will love and you will lose, and you will have to let people go and make mistakes and feel disappointed in yourself. And sometimes it just really, really sucks. The moment of comfort and understanding presented by that is really essential to life, I think. It's a humble film which feels slow, deliberate, yet very self-assured about its goals like that. The moments may be simple and the narrative might be straightforward, but the commitment to the execution and the ability to tell this moment and the whole story so honestly is so important. The ending of Arlo letting Spot go, pushing him back into the circle with the family he deserves, where he belongs, drawing a circle around them. I am a puddle every time. A gorgeous emotion which brings Arlo from a character who's figured some things out into a kid we know is going to be okay. That he's dealing with his father's loss, but still knows that Spot's going to be better off with a family who can care for him in the way he needs, and showing him walking into yet another difficult life stage with open arms, a steady gait, is really powerful. It's not just a film that's about grief or having lost someone. Its continual following of the river is present in more ways than one. There's a need to throw yourself in front of the waves sometimes to spare someone else pain. Maybe you do it for love. There's a need to throw someone out of the way sometimes, but there's a wisdom in letting it wash over you, knowing that a wave is a wave, a rocky crossing will pass. You may be bruised and you may need to learn to swim again, but it will not be easy, but you will be somewhere new and you'll be stronger for having believed in yourself. And I think the film does a great job of conveying that. The Good Dinosaur as a rumination on the ability to last through big life changes and becoming a new person through them is really important to me. Finding these forks in the road and still moving through life in a way that you can be proud of. But if that doesn't convince you, I have one more trap card laying in wait. I placed down the nostalgia card. I never needed to play it, actually. I still have it, but there's the only other trap card that I have, because I placed 2 down in the first turn. It's the personal reasons card, and the effect text reads, "You just have to let me have this one." You simply do. Let me tell you why. On the 9th of February 2009, I remember it because it was 2 days after the Black Saturday bushfires here in Victoria, I met someone who would become one of the best friends I'd ever have. He was 15 months old at the time, a dog who had failed out of customs airport training because he liked people too much. My dad worked at the airport at the time and thought we'd give him a good home. We had a habit of picking up dogs. He already knew how to fetch better than any other dog I've ever seen. He loved it. He'd do it till he was too tired to walk. The only thing he loved more than tennis balls was food. We tested that sometimes by placing his bowl down at the same time as throwing one, and after a few moments of, which do I go for? He'd usually go for the food. And the only thing he loved more than food was us. I think most people think of their childhood dog as the one they always remember having, but I was already 13 when I met who my sibling Ray would later name Moses. He was our family dog for the next 13 years, and I'm very glad to have realized that, even though I'd had dogs come and go before him, that he was the one you always hear about before he left. I'll be very happy forever that I showered him with all the love that I had for all of his last year. On the 20th of April 2022, when he could no longer walk, my dad and I carried Moses one evening and his bed into our home theater to watch a movie with him on his last night, and I chose The Good Dinosaur. I chose a movie about a boy and his dog. I sat on the floor with him, and my hand didn't leave his side for the full runtime. On the 21st of April, we let him go. There was a time where I couldn't think about this film without immediately evaporating. I always liked this movie. I always thought it was really special and had something to give. I ranked this film really high in 2021, and then Moses died the year later, but now it's really, really personal, and I can't be in the same room as it if I want to stay composed. I guarantee you I'm going to cry editing this video several times. I already cried writing this. It's not like a refreshing cry with The Good Dinosaur. It's not an ugly cry or like a silent, pretty, momentary cry. It's a, this is hurting my eyes, can it please just stop now kind of cry. Everybody's going to have an opinion on Pixar, and Lord knows I'll have had folks disagreeing with me every step of the way, but of any of my more controversial takes about Pixar films, this is the one I'm the most sure about. I don't care if it's for personal reasons and nothing else, but this movie is really special to me because it's associated with one of the final memories I have with one of my favorite living creatures I've ever had the honor of sharing time with on God's green earth. I miss and still think of Moses often, and even if he was asleep through most of it and didn't know what a movie was, I couldn't think of a better way to let him know what he meant to me and my family than sharing this beautiful movie with him, this beautiful film about grief and connection and courage and the love that crosses species of creatures in this big bad world in some of his final moments with us. But I'm not playing this trap card. I'm not telling you this is a reason really why I like The Good Dinosaur, but just to assure you of how much. To assure you that it has a place in the loftiest company of Pixar's catalog, because it really helped. And you know this about me. My subscribers know this about me. I've got priors. I don't use this stuff as a shield. It's not in my track record to use sentiment as an explanation. It's the opposite. They have watched as I have torn apart media I have loved at any stage of my life for any reason from end to end on multiple excruciating occasions. Any media I've ever given a shit about has a target on the back of its head and runs screaming from me once I pick up a gun because I don't miss. If I care about a movie or a game, I've shown that that's all the more reason to interrogate that feeling, not simply take it at face value. It's the whole point of my channel. If something makes me feel something I can't explain, I chase it down with a hatchet and scream in its face until it tells me exactly why. The vast majority of my work is a journey to try and explain to myself how I feel, not just say what I felt. So you can be guaranteed, if I had watched a garbage movie with my dog the day before he died, I would still say it's a garbage movie. And you know that. This is not the only reason I care about this movie. It's just the extra reassurance alongside to explain that I chose this film, one I'd already seen a number of times. I picked this movie out of anything I could have done to watch with my dog the day before he left because I knew it was the right one. And it helped. And I think of that moment with him still very, very fondly. The presence of this film in its narrative, its tools, its emotional core, this movie helped turn what could have been a very challenging loss for me, especially at the time of my life. Not going to go into that, but it turned it into a beautiful memory where I felt I was able to say goodbye to him in a way that it doesn't hurt to remember, but it brings me a great deal of peace to recall. I smile when I think about him because I was able to let him go right. I won't get into what else was happening in my life at the time, but man, I really could have used him around for the following few months. I really wished he'd been there. I wouldn't have left him. I would have taken better care of him, but I made my peace with it, and the Good Dinosaur helped me do it. Miss you, Mosey. Ultimately, I would agree with something that story supervisor Kelsey Mann said in the commentary about this film 1,000%. They knew early in the final production for this film that the climax would be Goodbye Spot from very early on, where Arlo says goodbye and pushes Spot to go with his human family. It was something of a North Star to guide each choice, said Mann, and so they knew where they were going, but the trick was earning it. I feel that the Good Dinosaur earns everything. Every little moment, be it a joke, a sigh, a moment of music, a look of fear, an intense stare down, I feel Dinosaur makes every choice not just to serve the story, but to make the story the best it can possibly be, and earns every emotion it goes for. Every scene is effective, every character is valuable and contributes to that feeling. Every performance conveys something deeper, and every feeling is earned because of it. A film that gets nothing for free is saddled with the difficult task of standing shoulder to shoulder with some of American animation's most beloved films, with barely the same amount of time or tricks to make it happen, and yet The Good Dinosaur stands taller than nearly every single one of them. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Pixar Quality. I had always envisioned this as like an 8-episode series, but these last 5 films have been a lot of work, and I wanted to separate each of them out into their own individual essays to kind of give each of them a chance to shine. If you'd like to catch the top 4, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button if you haven't already. It really helps me out. You know, consistent releases for once on my channel. We're doing that. For a change. Thank you so much, everybody. And I will see you soon for the number 4 slot. What could it be? Place your bets below.